A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 72. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
And a good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
It never opened the show that way, and that's why.
I know, I was like, oh, afternoon, now you're putting this, like, people are like, they might be listening to us in the morning,
yeah.
And they get all confused. And they
hello.
Think, I'm late for work.
I'll just say hello, everyone. And please enjoy your breakfast and or train ride and or lunch or dinner or late night video game session, however you are enjoying
your late night video game
this
sesh
podcast. Yeah.
I would be curious as to I like to read like anybody who, well, not like anybody, like me. I guess I don't know how other people do this, but I like to look at our stats. I'm always curious as to which episodes get downloaded more. And I'm not going to get into the hard numbers because it might make some of you depressed. But I am curious. One thing it doesn't say is it doesn't tell you what time of the day you got downloads. I'm kind of curious as to is there a general time? Do people like to listen to it in the car? Do they like to listen to it while they're exercising? Do they like to do they like to do sheetrock and listen to it? It's one of those things. I assumed that there was some show, another podcast was talking about some guy had an issue with his mailman. And then he found out that he had a ton of mailmen or mail carriers, mail carriers that were listening to the show because they're constantly looking for fresh content because they're basically, out 8-9 hours a day delivering mail and they need stuff to listen to. So they listen to a lot of podcasts. So if we have any mail carriers, let us know. Anyway, that's not really, what was my point? Oh, stats, stuff like that. But that's not important. We don't do this for the stats. We do this for the Star Wars. And jumping right into that, we are a Star Wars podcast because I don't know if we actually say that, but I assume if you're here, you know that. As far as Star Wars goes, as far as Rogue One goes, John and I have both recently seen the movie for a third time. John went yesterday. I went I think it was about a week ago. Yeah, it feels like that. Had some time. I thought, well, let's go out and see it one more time in theaters. The way I think of it is if they're going to kind of keep it the way The Force Awakens. Well, also, I was looking at Box Office Mojo. There's been a 36% decline in viewership over the last week or something like that. There's a lot of movies out there. There's that. I don't want to say
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures. I don't want to say the name wrong, but Hidden Figures is the top right now, and then there's that animated singing. I think it's called Sing. So.
Oh yeah.
I guess I'm not surprised after that this second new Disney-led Star Wars film wasn't going to beat the Force Awakens in the thing, and I definitely didn't think it was going to even meet it, just because how could you with all the how incredible the hype was last year?
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, in 2015.
It was, the highest grossing domestic box office of 2016, right? So movie, if you're only looking at US box office, Rogue One was at the top. But then I saw someone, I guess this was also just over a week ago, that posted basically adjusting for inflation, right? Because the issue with comparing just total numbers of, say, dollar amounts today versus, say, 1977, 78, 81, etc., is that, tickets cost a lot more now. There are more screens, and so, the possibility is lower. And so this was adjusted for inflation, Star Wars movies by domestic gross. And Rogue One, so of the 8 Star Wars movies that have been out, have been released so far, Rogue One came in at number 7, 477 million. I don't know whether these are current dollars or 1970s dollars. But, Attack of the Clones is basically the only Star Wars movie, when you adjust for inflation and things like that. Attack of the Clones is the only Star Wars movie that's done worse domestically. Now, I've also seen kind of conflicting reports about how Rogue One has done overseas, with some people saying, well, the Chinese, numbers haven't come in the way they thought, and so maybe it's a little disappointed, versus like, yeah, it's done okay pretty much everywhere else. And so I don't know what the overseas numbers are like, but, A New Hope is at the top. The Force Awakens was second in adjusted domestic gross for Star Wars movies. And so Rogue One currently sits at 7 out of 8, which, I think it did well. I think I would bet that this is probably about what they expected, right? It would do well, but that it wouldn't be like an astounding runaway success that The Force Awakens was. And there are, several reasons for that. One of them being The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie in decades. And now this is the second Star Wars movie in 2 years. And so, I have to imagine that they're kind of accounting for that as internally they set expectations for these things.
Yeah, every indicator is that they are completely pleased with the end result they've had. And like I said, even with the fact that it's still in theaters and it's people are still going to see it, that like they're probably starting to think about home video, and if it follows the tide of The Force Awakens, they'll be putting it out in April around the, obviously there's been no announcement, so grain of salt, but that'd be around the time that Star Wars Celebration's happening, which I think I've already mentioned that I was like, I assumed it was going to be in the summer, but Celebration is like in April. So so hey, so we did, since we've both seen it for a third time, and we were talking before we started recording that we both kind of had some similar takeaways about maybe on the third viewing. Now I always feel like now you can start like you aren't so focused on the story. It's like the story is in your head. You can kind of look at performances and little things. And I think both you and I, if I'm not mistaken, kind of took away a new appreciation for Forrest Whitaker's Saw Gerrera after this, which I would say.
Yeah,
please go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, no, just it's so. Right, he's at this point in Saw Gerrera's life, right? And we saw him, or we'll talk about this later, we've seen him in Rebels now, just a few years before the events of Rogue One, and physically he's doing better. He's not relying on the oxygen or whatever that is, the breathing mask, in Rebels the way he is in Rogue One, right? So at this point in his life and career in Rogue One, like he's pretty paranoid, and so he's like, lies, and have you come here to kill me? And, just that kind of like paranoid, slightly like he's cracking up basically. And just the way Forrest Whitaker kind of puts that into his voice and his performance, I think is fun. Like, it's kind of fun. Like, it's not, I don't know how fun it's supposed to be. Like if you would really call it like, oh, he was going for fun, but like, it's just so different from, so many of the other performances are like serious performances, right? Like Jyn Erso, that is a serious character, and Cassian Andor is a serious character, and Chirrut and Baze have some kind of comedic moments, and certainly K2SO has some comedic moments. but Jyn Erso, this is like the story of she kind of lost her family at the hands of the Empire, and then she finds out her dad's alive, and she's resolved to do this thing, and it's a very kind of serious, dramatic role and performance. But then you have like Forrest Whitaker coming in with his like kind of insane, thing. It's like just like not completely left field. Like it's not over the top. I think that's the other thing I appreciated too, right? That he played this as kind of cracking up and paranoid, but without just going so far over the top that it becomes ridiculous. Like I think it really works.
Yeah. And that's the thing about that made me realize that there's really very few, and this is a bad descriptive term, but I'm going to use it anyway. Like there's very few quirky performances. It's because I think basically people in Star Wars movies that they talk to provide information to each other, and there's very, very less kind of this idea of like existing within the world. I mean, we already kind of knew that Jyn was going there to try to get this Bodhi Rook, and because they explained their whole motivations and the fact that they had a history together and that they, it must have been troubled. So like we don't learn a lot from them. So like, yeah, it's just this kind of thing where you absorb his, his weird cast of, freedom fighters or whatever. And he gets to give this, this performance. Like I said, I'm just kind of reiterating what you said. And like it says, it's very quirky. It's almost something like it, like I said, it doesn't stand out, but it's almost like, wow, they've never really done this. It's, if it'd be like kind of like, did you mention like if the ruse of the Yoda had, were you saying this before?
Oh, I think we talked about this before the show, right? This was mostly in relation to Cheer It. Because I always, every time I watched it, I've liked Donnie Yen's performance. Just right. It's very he's very relaxed in the way he delivers his lines and kind of casual and he, like, you can tell he's having fun and he's kind of delivering these lines, when they're on Jeddah and when they're in Saw Gerrera's enclave in those cells, right? He's like, there's this kind of, it's not quite a winking performance, but in the way that he talks to these other characters, he's kind of got this like, yeah, I know something and I've got a secret and everything's going to be all right. And I know everything's going to be all right. And so, we'll get out of here. We've gotten out of stronger prisons than this. Baze Malbus was the, most dedicated one of us all, right?
Yeah. Like, and he says it in a very kind of sarcastic kind of way. And he's informing Cassian, and I guess this happens when they're in the prison,
right? And so with Donnie Yen's performance, I was saying that if you have that kind of that character that, I don't know if you'd call it an archetype or a trope, probably depends on how you feel about it, but of the kind of blind person who believes in this like higher force and whether that's the Force or whether that's something else, and they're kind of this not quite a sage, but the blind swordsman or the whomever else, right? There's a temptation to make him in this kind of like very serious, wise sage, kind of like Yoda as we see him later in Empire Strikes Back, and then in Return of the Jedi, and I guess in the prequels as well, right? That he was like, oh, he has a lot of wisdom to impart, and oh, he's this blind force believing person, right? Oh, he's so wise, and he has a lot of things to teach our hero, and that even without sight, they can do all these things, and there's kind of maybe with worse writers or in a lesser film, they would just say like, yeah, we'll just make that the character. But the way Donnie Yen plays him, it's sort of more like the playful Yoda when we first meet Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, where he's basically like making fun of Luke the whole time,
right?
And smacking R2-D2 with his little cane, and right, it's like that kind of, yeah, let's have some fun with this, and it the rest of the movie has all of these serious beats to it, like it's a dark movie, but let's kind of throw a wrinkle in this and and make this character who's like kind of having fun and kind of knows something that the other characters don't, and he uses that to kind of play with them a little bit. And that was one of the things I appreciated about Donnie Yen's performance. But I mean, in some ways, I guess you could say that applies to Saw Gerrera a little bit too, in that, like, you know, he's kind of on the other side of the spectrum, though, where he's just like, it's not that he has a secret that the other people don't know. It's that, like, he's completely cracked to the other side, and he's like, all right, let's have some fun with this, but, like, because I have nothing left to lose, and this is basically everything's coming to a head, and this is going to be the last chance at anything. So, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna indulge my paranoia.
Exactly. Yeah, you know, it's funny too, because I've heard some people like make some criticisms of when they make criticisms of Rogue One, which is, you know, it's always fine, but they kind of point to the whole Saw Gerrera sequence as like, oh, they could have cut that out. And it's like, the more I think of it, the more I'm like, yeah, no, there's some really good stuff. If you cut that out, that, you know, you do you miss out on these character beats, which, you know, they talked about these reshoots being, you know, people talking cockpits, which I think was code for development of characters. So I think This is obviously this was a reshoot of some sort, because I've seen pictures of you know, Felicity Jones with Forrest Whitaker, and he's, you know, obviously as an adult, and he's got he looks exactly like he looks in the little hologram when they're escaping from the Urso farm. So I think that there may have been some kind of evolution of that character, and that, you know, Forrest Whitaker maybe kind of took it to a new level. And it's a little different for a Star Wars movie, but it's, you know, it's interesting. And also it's so funny, the person I'm thinking of that kind of said they should have dropped that whole sequence. Maybe I might be confusing, but he had also pointed out that it was kind of interesting, and I should give credit where credit due. It's a podcast called Uninformed Opinions. It's a guy named Stuart Nocht. Anyway, I just want to make sure he gets credit. He had kind of talked about what he had said, that what he kind of wished they had played a bit more into is the idea, which he felt that I'm paraphrasing. It was there that maybe the rebels, at the point of just before the things start to go right for them, which is, you know, at the beginning of the movie, that they were actually kind of falling, like the rebellion was kind of dying, kind of much like the way the Jedi were kind of slowly dying off in the prequels. The fact that they, you know, they're almost, they weaken as the movies go on, and they kind of, I guess he had said that he'd like that, and I kind of agree. It's kind of showing that, like, yeah, the rebellion is in these, like, divergent, you know, they're not utilizing certain people because they don't like their methods, you know. Technically, shouldn't the rebels could have easily have gone, you know, had operatives in Jeddah and said, let's grab up these Guardians who obviously, you know, they're beholden to the tradition of the Jedi or whatever. They would make great warriors, but they don't, because they're kind of mired in this political back and forth, do we or don't we kind of thing. It's senators in their finery standing around screens arguing about whether or not they're going to stand up. And it's like, yeah, the rebellion was kind of at that point in the movie, it felt like, yeah, the rebellion was actually kind of dying. Like, no one, like the fuse was there literally or whatever, but no one wanted to light it. And, you know, Jyn Erso kind of, and a lot of events come to her, basically them stealing that ship and kind of lighting the fuse of the true rebellion that we kind of see in subsequent Star Wars movies. But it was kind of like an interesting observation, you know, mixed with my own. But it's, anyway, the third viewing, I feel like we got some of the subtleties of you know, what Donnie Yen and Forrest Whitaker were trying to do there in a way maybe you don't get on the first one or the first two. Yeah. So should we, speaking of, you know, performances and subsequent Star Wars movies, I mean, I guess one of the things that has been going on in the conversation of Star Wars is this, you know, obviously Carrie Fisher passed away over Christmas, and every indication was that she was going to be, as the movies went on, to episode 9, that her role would actually be increasing. And so that kind of, obviously her death has left Lucasfilm in this conversation that I'm sure is just something they never wanted to have to do. But, it's been a while now, and it's been a while. It hasn't been even a month yet, but it's like, I feel like we can talk about this and not feel like we're, not giving a proper time of respect for the actress. But, just the idea of like, so anyway, I'm talking in this weird roundabout way, is that basically what the rumors were is that, Lucasfilm is in negotiations with the estate of Carrie Fisher to potentially bring her back as a CGI character in episode 9. Now, we all know generally there's been every kind of rumor, casting rumor of things over the years for Star Wars, and generally Lucasfilm has a pretty consistent policy in the fact that they just don't talk about anything until it's all been done. But they actually went out of their way to like issue a statement, and I'm not going to read it because I don't have it with me, but basically the gist of it is that they have no plans to resurrect Carrie Fisher or Princess Leia as a CGI character in episode 9. But it was kind of like, if you wanted to overinterpret it, they didn't say 100% no. And I feel like, and
they said there are no current plans, which doesn't mean there aren't going to be future plans.
Yeah. And I think it was this week or last week or something, the news had said that they're having some kind of think tank or meeting of the minds with, Lucasfilm's higher ups and Bob Iger and Colin Trevorrow. And I don't know, I haven't heard anybody else, where they were just kind of sit down and really just kind of try to figure out what they're going to do moving forward. And it's kind of like, I mean, obviously episode 8 is out. I mean, I'm sorry, episode 8 is on the horizon.
Right. So that's all taken care of. Like, there's not really much they can change about that.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understood, since, John Williams is already scoring it, I get the feeling that they're just finishing up special effects and little things here and there.
Yeah, that's my sense too.
Of course, that also means, because now that Carrie Fisher's gone, they're also in a prime opportunity, since the movie, if it released episode 8, everything it's out there, and then they'd have to work with that. But now they're in a kind of a rare position where they can adjust things and maybe kind of do this, but they haven't said anything about it, and I doubt they would, because they don't want to discuss it. It's just kind of like, I guess my point with all this is like, even though this is a horrible decision to have to make, I mean, there, if you could recast, and I think people would be very upset about that. You could CGI, and I think people would be very upset about that. And I think that is 50% depending on how good it looked, and 50% people are just not going to accept it. I mean, I don't know. I have my opinion, and I guess I'll put it out there first, is that I'm willing to accept whatever decision they make. I just hope it serves this, that they feel free to serve the story best. I don't. Yeah. I think it
that seems to be, or at least everything they've said publicly about, everything going on. The story group is there. Well, it's whatever serves the story. It has to, it's about storytelling. It has to work with the story. And so that seems, at least publicly, to be their inclination. So,
yeah.
But
I mean, I think they're almost kind of at the point where they can't do this CGI thing, where it just, unless people, like, I don't know. I get the feeling sometimes Lucasfilm, they put things out there to test the waters. That's why we knew about Woody Harrelson.
Yep.
And they wanted, they put it out there and go, let's just let a rumor go out. And if people freak out and go, I'm not having that guy, then they might say, oh, that's just a rumor. But since people are like, well, that might be a little weird, but then they're like, yeah, I think we're going to do it.
Yeah. And same with Donald Glover too. I mean, the Woody Harrelson thing, I wonder if they had already cast him, because that the time between the rumor and the actual announcement was relatively short. I think like it was a week or so, right? Like maybe 2.
It was about a week.
But with Donald Glover, I think it was a couple months maybe between when they said, "Hey, we're thinking about casting Donald Glover as young Lando," and then when they actually announced it, that was longer. So I definitely thought that was, once they announced it, I was like, okay, that was the only person we had heard rumored that was probably either a trial balloon on Lucas's film, on Lucasfilm's part, or maybe his agent putting it out there is like, hey, let's get this deal done because now everyone thinks he's going to be young Lando, and so if he's not, then
right,
look weird.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of this going around. The Force Awakens, I think, would be a much bigger example of like you said, either it's agents or Lucasfilm with these test balloons, because I mean, before they made any of the casting announcements, they were basically Jesse Plemons, from Friday Night Lights. He was going to be Finn, and Saoirse Ronan, the Irish actress, she was going to be Rey. And I don't know what happened with Plemons, but I know that part of the Saoirse Ronan thing is that she, like, one of her agents let it slip that she was going to be, she's going to be a Jedi or something, and then almost like overnight her name went out of the running. So it's almost like, I think she even admits that her excitement cost her that role. So it's kind of one of the things where it's like, if your agent is dropping these things, maybe that, I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, I don't know how agents work, but I mean, these kinds of stories, I kind of have seen enough of them in sports and then in maybe politics to be able to like read the story and be able to piece together who probably leaked the thing. But with the movie business, I don't pay enough attention to it, like across a bunch of different movies to have enough like stuff stored up in my head of like, oh, okay, so this means that and this means that. I mean, my thing with the digital CG Leia going forward is, I mean, I didn't really have objections to the CG Tarkin or the CG Leia in Rogue One on like philosophical, like the idea of it wasn't offensive to me. I just didn't think they looked very good, like especially if you focus on like the area around the mouth when they talk, like it's so constricted, right? Like it doesn't look like the way a real person, like it sounds like they're talking with their teeth clenched, like that's what it looks like, right, to me. And also I didn't think the CG Tarkin sounded like anything. It sounded a lot like, I mean, he did sometimes, but then like the ends of the sentences or the ends of the words didn't really sound like Peter Cushing to me. So if they do it in the future, I would hope that they would like have developed the technology to the point where it looks like absolutely seamless and like you can't even tell. And so for me, it's like, if they do it, I want it to serve the story, but I also want it to look good. Right. And if it serves the story, but it's kind of like, this sort of looks like Leia in The Force Awakens, but not total. Like, you just have to not focus on any details and just kind of glance at the other part of the screen, and you can pretend that that's really Carrie Fisher. I was thinking that myself. I was kind of, that concept, which I'll be honest, I had never even heard this term until about a month ago, and I was texting with our friend Sam, and he had used this Uncanny Valley term, and I swear I'd never heard that term before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know. It's like, and I was thinking, it's like, being a person like in college, I was a huge like Philip K. Dick fan, so I'm always reading about simulacrum and stuff like this. It just never came up in my readings. But I mean, for people like me that don't know, it was kind of a robotics professor named Masahiro Mori or something like that. Yeah, it was a professor in 1970, and it was just this idea that, it's a long thing to explain. It's like what do you call it? It's a graph, where it's basically you look at something and it's the kind of your perception. It's like
how realistic it looks, like graphed against how much like your perception, like how well you respond to it.
Right.
And like, yeah, and it goes up, right? So the more realistic something looks, the better audiences respond to it, except when you get like right up near the end, and then there's the valley, right? Because the graph spikes downwards. Because like there's a certain point where it looks close to realistic, but not exactly realistic, that humans just have a heart, like our brains just, we see that and we go, okay, something's not quite right yet, because part of my brain is telling me that that's a real person, but I can tell that something is not quite right. And that like makes our brains go like, yeah, I don't really trust this. I don't like it.
Right.
And so that's the Uncanny Valley.
I mean, it's fascinating because I mean, I guess I understood the concept in general. I guess I just didn't know the name of it. And yeah, it's the fact is like there is a kind of, like you said, with the CGI of anything, when they did, well, I mean, I'll even argue that in some respects, I had a revulsion to Wayne Pygram's Tarkin when he did it, when he had these exaggerated cheekbones. I mean, I knew what Wayne Pygram looked like. I knew him from Farscape. He was on Lost briefly. I knew what the guy looked like, so I knew that like, oh, his cheekbones, and they kind of had to make it. And then we ended up at the end of episode 3, which it was a brief shot, but I'm talking about behind the scenes, like it showed up on trading cards and stuff, this picture of him as Tarkin, and it was like the idea that his face was bigger because they had to add a face on top of his face, right. Therefore and then like was like that kind of weird like revulsion that I have. And there was, and I'll be honest, like as much as I was like, oh yeah, it's a technological marvel, and Star Wars is a, Star Wars is, I was saying this, like Star Wars, I feel has a, outside of its narrative, also has this long tradition of pushing the envelope of
right. We've
special
talked about
effects.
how great ILM is, and
But there is a certain revulsion when you see that stuff, and like even on my third thing, it's like I was still looking at Tarkin, and I actually thought, I totally agree. The mouth thing is a little weird. It's not it's not perfect, and there's this kind of strange kind of revulsion, and I feel like Disney it would not be smart for Disney to, unless it's like the thing that I was saying before about like, oh, it really comes down to money, that if we're willing to spend $12 million on a CGI, Princess Leia, it would look perfect. But I honestly don't, I feel like we're not quite there yet, that we all know. It's fine when it's like, when it's robots and when it's stormtrooper, clone troopers and things like that, where you're not, it's even like in my toy collecting that I, do. And it's like, I was at a Walmart looking at, Scarif troopers or whatever. And I was buying it. I'm like, wow, this looks great. And then right next to it, they had an Orson Krennic. And I think right now at this point, Orson Krennic is actually still kind of not easy to come across. And I was like, well, should I buy this? And I just didn't, because it's like, again, the physical representation of the human face, even though it's people that are in the know have told me it really comes down to the paint job that they're able to do at the factory. A lot of times people will actually go back and repaint the heads and they look better. There is this kind of thing where all of a sudden you go, ugh, it's repulsive to you. And I wouldn't want them to, they could do, $12 million, $20 million just on making, like, we just want to get Princess Leia to do the story thing. And if people, and if just even like a third of people are like repulsed by it, it's just, I feel like it would just kind of like the whole movie might fall as a house of cards. I mean, even now, if I go back and like one of my favorite TV shows is The Sopranos, and the woman, I can't remember her name, that played Tony Soprano's mother passed away during the production of like the second, maybe third season. And she was going to actually be a major part of this because it was something to do with stolen airline tickets. So they had written this arc with her. Well, she passed away. Nancy Marchand is her name. And they did a CGI, which it was HBO budgets in the 90s. So it's this horrifying floating head of an outtake of Nancy Marchand on top of a double, and the head floats. The only other thing that I could say that the equivalent is for people who, have the special edition, the current special editions of Return of the Jedi, and that really horrifying floating head thing of Hayden Christensen over Sebastian Shaw's body, and you're just like, this is so wrong. It's just, like you said, it's like, it's something, it's only the briefest of shots, obviously, in Return of the Jedi, and really the conversation in The Sopranos, it's just a brief thing where she's like, it's like she doesn't have dialogue,
right?
And even then, we couldn't suspend our disbelief. So the idea of this beloved person that she's playing Carrie was playing a character, so it's like Carrie's not Leia and Leia's not Carrie, but we know the history behind it, and I just don't think there's any way to bridge that gulf in 2017 even 2018 or 20 or whenever this movie is coming out, that I just don't think we can bridge that gulf. So it probably just behooves them to really think about how to recraft the story to not have Princess Leia in it. It's just I realize I'm like jumping around. But I feel like I kind of I've convinced myself just talking about it that I actually started out saying like, well, if they do it, if whatever serves the story. But the truth is, I just feel like it can't be done. There's no way that you're going to satisfy. You can never satisfy everyone, but I just don't think you could satisfy even a majority of people with this. I think you would just look at it and you'd be like you're going to be looking at the holes, like, oh, her chin looks wrong. Oh, her eyes look dead. Oh, the woman that they hired to do her voice. I mean, I know that there's supposedly now some kind of Photoshop for audio that they're coming out with now, that they literally can take, they can take the phenom, the phenom, that's not the term, 2 linguistics classes, and you'd think I'd know what I'm talking, the phonetic structures of how we talk, and they can actually re-edit it. And they did a little bit of that in The Force Awakens, trying to, James Arnold Taylor mixed with James Arnold Taylor got cut. I think he got cut out of Force Awakens.
Right. He was like, well, we'll use him because we may not be able to get
Ewan. And they got Ewan, and then they twisted it with an outtake they used a bit of it for Alec Guinness. But now they supposedly have this thing that you can do. I mean, I had read somewhere just the other day, crossing the streams a little bit, that Majel Barrett, the widow of Gene Roddenberry, she actually years ago, and she's since passed, she recorded like the 42. I think there's 42 in English. There's like 42 different sounds that are generally used in the English language, and she recorded as many of these little things so they could, because she was always the voice of the ship's computers on Star Trek, and so now they have these things and they can actually like put together words, so she can be the ship's computer for the next 100 years when they make Star Trek movies. I mean, and in some ways that's a minor thing, but eventually, and I've said this before, eventually I have a strong belief that when I'm old, really old, that there will be Star Wars movies that are completely CGI, and it's probably going to be, the original cast, and probably maybe it'll be post Return of the Jedi adventures, but it'll be almost like the comic books, but they'll have worked out some deal with the sad to say it, the estates of these actors, and they'll be using them. I honestly feel that at some point it's going to be common with these kind of franchises. They'll make an Avengers movie in 2070 with the CGI Robert Downey Jr. I just feel like that's where we're headed, but I just hope they don't. I just hope they don't do it now.
Yeah. I read. I can't remember if it was today or yesterday. Brief interview with John Knoll about putting the CGI or the CG together and some of the other effects for Rogue One, and the person asked him like, "Oh, were there miniatures used?" in this film, and John Knoll said, well, no, miniatures have a special place in my heart because that's the first that was my first job on a Star Wars show, and then from there it was, basically doing the camera work, shooting the miniatures. So he was like, they'll always have a special place in my heart, and I'll always, be an advocate for them. But on Rogue One, it didn't make sense. We weren't going to get, the most value for the money out of doing miniatures. And I wonder, as this technology develops, the technology gets better, but it also gets cheaper, right? I mean, the kind of computers that they can use today to do CG are both better and cheaper than the kind of computers that they had to use to do the CG stuff in the mid 90s. Right. That's just kind of how it goes. And the programs get better and the programs get cheaper, especially, if they're writing a lot of their software themselves, they'll just be building on that software in the future rather than starting from scratch. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it is possible that eventually they'll just get to the point where they'll say, hey, we need Han Solo in this movie, but only for like 2 scenes, rather than, bring Alden Ehrenreich back in because he I'm thinking, 10, 20 years down the road, right? Like rather than bring Alden Ehrenreich in because, he'll be about the same age that Harrison Ford was then, rather than bring him in, it'll be cheaper for us just to do kind of like a digital composite of this thing. And it looks pretty good. And, it's less expensive for us to just do it that way. And then we just hire a voice actor to kind of fill in the gaps and then use that program you were alluding to, or then we can kind of merge that with Harrison Ford and Alden Ehrenreich and, kind of create the character that way. It's just for 2 scenes. This is a cheap way to do it, or the most cost effective, I'll say, way to do it. So we'll just do it that way. Yeah. So I'm probably, I don't know if you would say more optimistic or skeptical that eventually we'll get to an all CG Star Wars movie, but I could definitely see that becoming less of like a special event, a big showy thing. Right. Like with Maz Kanata or Snoke or now Tarkin and Leia. And more of just like, yeah, we just wanted to add some background characters. And so we just did it digitally. Right. Or yeah, we needed Poe Dameron in this scene. And so rather than have to pay Oscar Isaac a ton of money, we just got a guy who's kind of the same height and the same build, and then just digitally recreated his face. And it looks fine, and we didn't have to spend a lot of money for it. So that's how I could see that moving, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, and I honestly, I don't think the way you see it is actually out of sync with the way I see it, because I feel like the stuff you're talking about is kind of the preamble to, 50 years in the future kind of thing.
That's true.
There's a movie that came out, and I haven't seen it because every time I bring this up, I think I need to see this movie. And it was Robin Wright did a movie called The Congress in 2013, and it's a story of, and this is the synopsis from IMDb. It says, an aging out-of-work actress accepts one last job, though the consequences of her decision affect her in ways she didn't consider, which is a, kind of a simplistic way. But basically, it's a woman who, she's an actress, and she sees her career's kind of slowing down. So she basically she retires from acting and licenses her complete likeness. Like they go in, put it in her computer and stuff. And so she basically gives away her likeness rights for life. And it kind of jumps off from that. And I heard mixed reviews on the execution of the movie, but I kind of want to see this now. The more at first I was like, oh yeah, it's just that kind of thing. But this is so kind of close to what we're dealing with, this idea of like, the capacities of commerce versus, fandom and what their expectations are. And, people are very, can be offended, with these kind of things in a very profound way. So, of like saying resurrecting people digitally and stuff. And it's like, again, it's almost like that, and I don't understand the Uncanny Valley to speak on it much, but I would say it's almost like this is another thing. It's like how much how much of this can you do before people are just offended by it? How do you technology versus, propriety versus, it's just kind of, it's really interesting that, again, Star Wars is kind of going into this weird's not really the right term, but going into this unknown territory where it's like, well, George sold it, yet he's still alive, but he doesn't have an influence on it. Yet when a production is made, people reach out to him for his guidance. So it's kind of like Star Wars has got a lot of interesting. It's going to be, again, it's kind of, I feel like in some ways going forward, it's going to be in the forefront of these kind of issues in entertainment. So it's kind of like, it's like endless conversation topics.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that's kind of what I guess we can kind of put a pin on it with this. Was there any other like movie stuff that we were going to talk about? Let me look at the outline. Sorry.
Not that I can think of. No, I mean, I think that's it. I have been, I guess after I saw it the third time yesterday, I've been thinking a little more about who the protagonist of the story that's contained within what's it called? Catalyst and then Rogue One, right? Because there's it's been a long time since I've read it, but right. Someone made the point or suggested that Palpatine is really the protagonist of the first 6 Star Wars movies, because he's the one pulling all the strings the entire time, kind of, and he's the one making the decision. Everything, like if you just take the strict definition of a protagonist,
right?
Palpatine is the one kind of pulling all the strings and setting everything in motion and putting people in specific places in order to do things. I mean, so with Rogue One, I mean, I guess you could say that, well, there's like an off-screen protagonist, maybe either, Palpatine or not entirely off-screen, but Tarkin, you could maybe say he's the protagonist because he's the one who is kind of putting Krennic, in his position, and he's like, oh, well, I'm taking over this project that I suggested to the Emperor several years ago, right? So he's saying basically the Death Star was his idea. And so then does he become the protagonist of just kind of the Catalyst Rogue One story, even though he's not really in much in either? I mean, is it Galen Erso? I mean, the reason I don't think it's Jyn, even though Jyn is like the main character of Rogue One, but she's a baby for all of Catalyst, and so
right.
Considering that Rogue One is essentially the culmination of the story that started in Catalyst, and you can, I think, very easily put them together. If you take them together, I think it's hard to say that Jyn is the protagonist, because she doesn't really make any decisions up until she's probably, honestly, until Saw Gerrera kicks her out when she's 16, and then she starts making kind of decisions for herself and kind of decide what kind of life she wants to lead, and then that changes obviously in Rogue One and all that. So either it's Galen or Krennic or maybe Tarkin, and then maybe Palpatine. But just kind of think, I was just trying to think of that. Like, so who, given that I have read Catalyst, and obviously the people who haven't read Catalyst and just saw Rogue One, they're going to say, oh yeah, Jyn Erso is like the protagonist and the main character. But if we are to kind of view all of these things as one, and maybe we're not all supposed to put them on the same tier. But if this is if Catalyst is a prequel to Rogue One and we're supposed to kind of take them as part of the same story, then I mean, I think it's harder to say that Jyn is really the protagonist, and then it becomes maybe. I mean, when I saw the movie yesterday, I was thinking it was Krennic, because he's the one who's kind of positioning. He in Catalyst, he has more of that role, I think, because he's the one who kind of positions Galen to be contributing to this Death Star project before he realizes that that's what he's actually doing. But I guess it's not clear to me like who exactly the protagonist of that Catalyst Rogue One story is, which is kind of interesting, and I don't know how much of that was intentional, how much of that was just different story processes and the fact that they expect a lot of people to see Rogue One without reading Catalyst, and so they can't assume a lot in how they present Rogue One. But it wasn't on our agenda, but it was just something I've been kicking around since yesterday, and I didn't know if you had thoughts on it.
It's funny you bring that up, and it makes me think about, like, if you kind of couch it like you go, well, Catalyst, Rogue One, A New Hope, and you do it like that's like almost like a mini narrative trilogy. Well, I mean, I keep on saying I need to do this, and I haven't done it. It's like I haven't read Tarkin, and I feel like I'm probably... I should have read Tarkin, because it makes me feel like my first blush on this is that it's Tarkin, and I forget Tarkin's involved. I know he has involvement in Catalyst, but because isn't this whole thing part of the Tarkin Initiative, they call it, or whatever, this idea?
Right.
So it's like...
Ruling through fear, yeah. Yeah, so I hadn't thought of putting Tarkin together with it, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I forget. See, I don't know that story, but it would be the idea where it's almost like trilogies within trilogies or something. Like it creates this idea where it's, cross
wheels within wheels,
within wheels. But the idea that even though he isn't involved in the day-to-day operations of the story, it's kind of like, this is his bureaucratical machinations, where I feel like might be a mistake to call the Emperor the protagonist, because I feel like the way it's revealed in the original trilogy, which is what I'm talking about, is that his concerns. Well, let's go back and let's just do the whole saga. His Palpatine's concerns are political, and then slowly they become spiritual or philosophical by the end. And by the time by the time of the Rogue One era of Star Wars, is like he's not, Krennic mentions him, but he's not interested. He doesn't participate. Krennic goes out and tries to get, who should I go out and talk to get them concerned about this Death Star situation in my place in it? I'll go to Vader. Well, I feel Vader's, at his point, his thing is kind of metaphysical more than, he doesn't care about the Empire that much. I mean, he cared about it when he was first Darth Vader, but now he's become this monster, or the Sith. Maybe he's concerned with healing himself. He's concerned with maybe healing himself so eventually he can kill the Emperor. But my point is that, projects and weapons and bureaucracy, I don't think the Emperor actually cares about it. And he kind of pops in by the time we finally see him in his full glory by Jedi. It's mainly because the rebels have become such a liability for him that he can't just, sit around and be that spiritual guy, the Sith Lord. He has to get more involved. Although it's like when he finally shows up to the Death Star, he actually has a twofold thing, because he's overseeing it, because the last time I let you guys just build this without me, it got blown up. And then he also had a feeling or something that eventually will be able to, either kill or convert this Luke Skywalker person, and I'll get a new apprentice. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So in the first 6 movies, right? The first 6 episodes. The Emperor's goals are really twofold, right? Rule the galaxy, and maybe personal immortality.
Yeah.
Right. We haven't really gotten any word on whether that he was trying to become immortal thing is still out there, still part of the story. So right, it was kind of his personal gain, right? It was right. To make himself powerful, unlimited power. Exactly. And so even right. So if that's his goal, he has the parts that he focuses on, which you point out, which is right. He has Vader. He has kind of the empire writ large of ruling through order and fear, and but I feel like maybe some of the specifics of a Death Star, a Death Star, or whatever, right? Whatever it's going to take to accomplish that, he's fine with. But in terms of like overseeing the specific projects and ideas and like, so how's construction on that Death Star coming along, right? He keeps, we may have talked about this before, but you know, I'm sure he keeps tabs on it through Masameda or whomever. You know, he's aware of what's happening, but he's not like micromanaging, and he's not involved in the day-to-day aspects of at least the first Death Star.
Right.
So yeah, it's less clear to me that he is kind of the protagonist of that, the story of the first Death Star. You know, I suggested it mostly because there's that idea. Well, if he's, you know, pulling the strings even in the first one, and he's, you know, kind of setting things in motion in episode 4, then, you know, this leading directly into episode 4, then maybe we could say the same thing. And, you know, maybe there's an off-screen story that we just haven't learned about yet, about, you know, the Emperor's relationship with Orson Krennic, and oh yeah, he's the one who, you know, put it in Tarkin's mind to suggest the Death Star. But at least for now, it seems like, yeah, Tarkin he may have that kind of pulling the strings role. But then, you know, in terms of finding Galen Erso and you know, going through, you know, making the choices about how to pursue Galen Erso and how to pursue the Death Star project and to put it at Geonosis and everything else, you know, that seems like it's more Krennic's wheelhouse. You know, that's more his doing, and so maybe he's in charge. But then I guess it depends on what perspective you take. It would from a certain point of view, you know, then Galen maybe becomes the protagonist because he's the one making the decisions about, hey, I'm going to build this failsafe into the Death Star. I'm going to be the one who, you know, continues working but makes the reactor weak, and I'm going to be the one who maybe cultivates this Imperial cargo pilot and gets him a message and sends him out and sends a message to Jin, and, you know, I'm going to be the one who tries to you know, make these critical decisions about how to stop this thing. And so then maybe, I mean, you know, maybe he is the protagonist. I don't know.
Yeah.
I never took enough English classes and really dissected enough literature and to be able to really parse these things out with any level of skill. But
yeah, well,
I think it's worth thinking about. But and certainly, you know, Jin is the main character of the movie. But then when you talk about the larger story, kind of her role as the protagonist is not really there as much. And then it's like, well, then what is she? Right? Is she? She's just a kid whose dad worked for the Empire, and she got caught up in this rebellion. That she was kind of born into this rebellion, really, because she was raised by Saw Gerrera and then kind of fended for herself, and then came back to it, and then died young, right? And so, you know, she died a hero for the rebellion, but in terms of the larger piece of it, you know, maybe. You know, she becomes a footnote in history. I don't know.
Right. It's just like, and that's, you know, it's funny when you think about the Rogue One story. It's kind of like, again, I have a degree in English, and I don't even know if have the capacity to really break down what a protagonist is in this story. But you know, if you think about it, it's like, well, in some ways, like, Krennic kind of lights the fuse on the Death Star when he shoots Lyra Erso, when he has her shot.
Right.
It's like, that's when he makes the decision. It's like, I'm just gonna, you know, and it's kind of weird because Galen always keeps referring to his daughter that she's probably dead. And it's like, it's kind of a weird concept to be like, you know, it's like, it's almost like foreshadowing to us now when we watch it. But like in the movie, he's just like, well, I don't know if you're still alive and all this. It's like, yeah, well, she's alive, and isn't it great? But then at the end of the movie, actually, you know, we're talking, this could be a week after she sees this video. Well, she's dead in a week. And then, like, you know, it's this kind of like sadness that he did die knowing his daughter was still alive, but it's kind of like that weird kind of sadness where it's like, maybe he lights, you know, Krennic lights the fuse, but it's like, you know, he made that fuse which actually ends up kind of leading to the death of his own child. It's that kind of like,
right,
where it's like, okay, I built this thing and then I built the weakness in it, but I'm sure he never had any intent that his daughter was going to die on a beach trying to destroy this thing.
Yeah, he's deciding it's not just his life's work is destroying the thing. Oh, this is going to be my family's life's work.
Exactly.
I'm making this decision for my daughter. Yeah,
which is always kind of funny because it's like the way that that kind of way that Urso is portrayed in Catalyst, and even in more so with Mads Mikkelsen's performance, which is kind of, I don't want to use the word. I'll just say it. He's a little stiff. But I mean, I think that's who he's playing. That's not a criticism of Mads Mikkelsen. I know he's a fine actor. Everybody in the movies is great. But sometimes because it's a Star Wars movie, it's like, sometimes it's like emotion isn't the first, people. Maybe that's again. Maybe that's
he's just coming off of playing an emotionless serial killer.
Exactly. That's I mean, he to be perfectly frank, he's played an unemotional killer a few times in a few times, right? Le Chivre, and
right.
The one he did with Redfin, the one where he plays like a Viking gladiator. I actually love that movie.
Yeah, I mean,
it's crazy. It's a crazy movie.
I think in our very first kind of reaction recap episode from seeing Rogue One, I think I said no one gave a bad performance in the movie, but like there were some people who were very good and then some people who were just fine. And I think the actors in the movie who were just fine, it wasn't necessarily that they're bad actors. It's just they weren't given a lot to work with. And I think that's true of Mads Mikkelsen in this movie, right? Like in the book, he's this kind of like genius and he's kind of spacey and he forgets where he is and who he's talking to because he's suddenly struck with his ideas and all these, kind of brilliant scientist cliches, but none of that is actually in the movie. And so I don't know how much of that like was known to him.
Right. Well,
as like the backstory for his character. He's just all he knows in the movie is he's a scientist who helped build the Death Star. He doesn't want his family involved. Then his boss basically shoots his wife. And so he resists. He pretends to be sad. He pretends to be beaten down. And then he dies, right? Like there's not a lot of arc to the character just within the runtime of the movie, right? Once you start add in the prequel book, then you can talk about that a little bit, but none of that is in the movie. None of that's in the script, and so I don't know how much of that was already developed and given to him as like backstory for this character, or whether he was like, yeah, I'll play the dad in this, the brilliant scientist dad in the Star Wars movie. Sure, fine, great. I'll be in Star Wars.
And it's that funny thing where one thing I will say, and I'm back to criticizing Rogue One, but it's not really a criticism, it's just a remark. It's just, you look at the way that the whole like early part of the Krennic Urso scene adds, like he shows like that they had their conversation about why he walked away, and then he's like, well, we need to come back. Oh, well, my wife died. And then he's like, and then it doesn't seem to really affect Krennic. So like, why did he think he was going to give a crap if his wife died? And then he goes, oh, my memory's not what it used to be either. And then it's just like that, when Krennic says you're a terrible liar, it's so true, because however they wrote this scene, it's like, what were they going to do next? Oh, obviously you're not, you still have your mind. And it's like, oh, but I have this cough as well.
Well, that's a hard thing to like play. It's like you're lying, but you're not very good at lying.
It's kind of like
action, and you're like, oh, and I forget things.
I guess
simple things.
I would say this, that one thing, I was like, when I watched that movie, it was like when Lyra pops up over the ridge, and I'm just like, my thought in my head was, really? I told you to run. Yeah. Why are you coming back? He's got like 8 stormtroopers, man. It's like, I made this sacrifice so you could run, and then you decided to come back with my, you're going to shoot this Imperial officer and his 5 elite troopers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, especially since he might have sent I don't know. Did he send the troopers into the thing before? Yeah, he sent the troopers into the farm after he revealed that Lero had passed away. So therefore, like, not only is like there's only one trooper out there, but then like she's gonna get shot in the back anyway. Where are they going? They don't have a ship. It's kind of they're just gonna run. But I don't want to nitpick it. But it's kind of like, yeah, it makes me wonder: was Mads Mikkelsen trying to portray a bad liar, or did it just?
Right.
Like he didn't get the emotional beat on there. He doesn't have a lot of room to work in that movie. So
yeah.
But I don't know. I honestly, to kind of my point about the Tarkin thing and going all the way back to this protagonist thing. It's like I kind of wonder if like, yeah, you could make an argument that like he's the bureaucratic. He's the best example of the bureaucratic empire. He talks about taking someone's credit, taking over someone's project, and then later in A New Hope he gleefully mentions the fact that that the senators they just dissolved the council permanently, which I said on Twitter that I wonder if that means that they like literally went out and shot all the senators.
Yeah,
like they never talk about
permanently.
They talk about it. They never talk about it. Like they might have literally just sent stormtroopers into all their offices and they shot them all, and that's like the end of the Imperial Senate. But then, because now that we have the Death Star, it doesn't matter. It's like, how are we going to maintain control without the bureaucracy? It's like this battle station will keep the systems in line because they're just going to show up and, if you misbehave, we'll just blow your whole planet up. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, did you have something to say?
No.
So should we move on to Rebels then?
That's a good place to move on. So, getting back to Saw Gerrera a little bit, so there have been 2 episodes of Rebels since the second half of season 3 began. The first was the mid-season premiere, I guess. It's a 2-part episode called "The Ghosts of Geonosis." This is where Bail Organa himself sends the Ghost crew plus Rex on a mission to Geonosis because they had sent a team there previously led by Saw Gerrera, but he disappeared, and so the Ghost crew plus Rex is headed to Geonosis to try to either find Saw Gerrera or find out what happened to him. They find Saw Gerrera. Basically, his whole team was killed, but they find Saw Gerrera along with evidence that the Empire has been maintaining an old shield generator on Geonosis. And well, why is that? They don't figure it out, but they do encounter one single solitary Geonosian. So Geonosis has been basically wiped out. I'm not sure about this. I'll come back to this. But basically, there's one Geonosian left on the planet who they named Click Clack because he makes a noise that sounds like Click Clack. Not Pit Pat, but Click Clack. And so Click Clack has been using old separatist droids to help protect a queen egg that would mean the survival of the Geonosian race. Saw Gerrera and to a slightly lesser extent Rex have very antagonistic feelings towards the Geonosians. Kanan basically wants to get out of there. Ezra is kind of caught in between because he, looks up to Rex, but he's not sure he can trust Saw Gerrera because Saw Gerrera is very kind of angry at this Geonosian and very extreme with a guitar solo. So they're there. There's some back and forth about Saw Gerrera and what to do with this Geonosian. They find evidence of Imperial poison gas canisters, which indicates that the Empire itself basically exterminated this planet's inhabitants. So they try to bring the canisters back with them, but just then an Imperial cruiser shows up, and so they have to drop the canisters. But Saw comes with them. They have the repulsor core from the shield generator, which will be very useful to them. And then they took video of the canisters, which they'll, hopefully Bail Organa will try to show to the Senate and get systems to start opposing the Empire. we all learn a valuable lesson about Saw Gerrera and the fact that, yes, he has extremist methods, but that doesn't mean he's not a person, and he's just mad because his sister was killed, and that made him very sad inside and makes him continues to make him sad inside to this day, and that maybe explain his behavior. And then the kind of big thing in this episode is that they're all kind of standing around with like, what's the Empire up to here? And then Click-Clack draws kind of a larger circle with a smaller circle up in the corner of the larger circle, a circle inside of another circle. It's clearly meant to represent the Death Star, but of course none of these people have any context for what that is or means or anything. And so they just say, oh, it's a circle inside of another circle. Maybe that's the Empire's, insignia, or maybe that this shield generator, it's referring to the shield generator that's kind of tubular and everything. And so basically they're given a clue as to what the Empire is up to, but they don't have enough other knowledge to be able to understand what it means. And so that's the Ghost of Geonosis. Now on Twitter, folks, or I can't remember if it was Twitter or if it was Rebels Recon, but someone asked Pablo Hidalgo, is that queen egg in the Ghost of Geonosis, is that the queen that then hatches and becomes the queen that we see in the Darth Vader comic on Geonosis, who had, if you'll recall from the Darth Vader comic, the early issues, Vader and Aphra and the droids go to Geonosis, and there's this kind of queen there that has been making these like Geonosian droid hybrids and that is her, Geonosian population and her children and everything. And so Paulo Hidalgo confirms that this is in fact the queen that hatched out of that queen egg that we have now seen in Rebels. So that's the connection there. I mean, the one bit that I'm still a little confused about that I alluded to earlier was, right, so they say, okay, the Empire wiped out the Geonosian race, but they're still using... this would have been in the right time period where Krennic was using Geonosians to build the Death Star. And so did they just take everyone who was willing to work on the Death Star and then kind of salt the earth behind them? Did they get as much work out of the Geonosians as they could and then killed all of them? So basically it's not clear to me that like this was the last surviving Geonosian or whether this was just the last Geonosian on the planet Geonosis. And there are still Geonosians running around, but they're just working on the Death Star right now. So anyway, so that was that episode. It was a 2-part episode, not a lot of action, a lot of kind of walking around caves and trying to figure out what's happening. And again, they meet Saw Gerrera and they all learn a valuable lesson about why he's mad at the Empire and why he is maybe a little more extreme than some of the others. And that's that episode. So what did you think about that one?
Oh, man, I really like the fact that I like the continuity of getting Forrest Whitaker to come in and do the voice, but it's like I didn't really feel like I took away a lot from it. It just seemed like, it was like a 2-part episode that I felt like they could have done it in 22 minutes. There's a lot of like,
I agree.
Just kind of like a lot of hemming and hawing, and I just didn't quite. Yeah, I had that same thing. It's like I thought the Geonosians were like, there's this whole sequence in Catalyst where, oh gosh, what's the guy's name? He's kind of one of the head Geonosians, and he takes Poggle the Lesser, and he kind of escapes or whatever. But they talk a bit about Geonosian culture or something, and about how they don't really have the kind of the same concept of, self-preservation or value of life, and that. Now, this might just be a king's, having a fundamental misunderstanding about his subjects, but it's kind of like I thought they were just trying to explain, like, oh, they're basically like termites. They'll fight on a drop of a hat. They like killing each other, kind of thing. And then this, I don't know, it just kind of like this Click-Clack character. I was like, where did this Click-Clack kind of fall into this whole idea of self-preservation and being kind of a belligerent group, belligerent race or whatever. Maybe the idea who knows? There could have been a physiology to it, like, oh, well, it came across an egg, therefore the egg releases pheromones, which enacts this preservation thing and click clack and makes them actually care about saving stuff. So, I mean, it can all be explained in behind the scenes stuff. I just, like I said, I just felt like it was kind of like what they were really trying to get across was a very simple idea, and they drug it out to like a 40-minute episode. And I'm just like,
it did seem like there was, I felt the same way, that like, there's nothing here that suggests like, oh, this obviously should have been a 2-part episode, right? There wasn't like so much story that they couldn't fit it. I mean, maybe it felt like maybe there was too much story to fit in 22 minutes, but there was still only like 27 minutes of story, really. And so they're like, well, we'll just extend it rather than like edit stuff out. The whole thing about the what's it called? The shield generator.
Right.
I mean, that kind of could have been cut. I mean, obviously it's a clue that the Empire is up to something on Geonosis, and that is, working on the Death Star and everything. But I feel like they could have learned about the Death Star, and they could have found the gas canisters without ever having to worry about this, the shield generator. And so I don't know. It seemed like there was, again, maybe a little too much material for a 22-minute episode, but not enough material for 44 minutes.
Yeah, it's like, it almost feels like the whole generator subplot, shield generator, was just to put people in peril so they could have some kind of motion.
Right. They needed that time lock, or the thing it's called, where like, oh, we have to do this before the thing happens, and then yeah. I
mean, I guess like I said, it was nice that they're trying to tie this all together. But what are we about? We're at the stage of this point. We're about 5 years before the full the integration into like the Rogue One, A New Hope timeline. Is that what we're trying to? We're about 5 years away. So Saw's obviously still, he's wearing the same clothes, but he's still got the shaved head, and which I don't know if maybe this thing was done. Maybe this thing was produced. This episode was in production before they knew about the change, the aesthetic change of his kind of idea. I mean, I guess my point is that I would have liked to have seen, we've already gotten the young Saw Gerrera from Clone Wars, and I was never particularly wowed by that time, those stories or whatever. But it would have been more interesting. So at this point, we're 5 years away. So he probably at this point has ditched Jyn. She's about 22 or something in the Rogue One. So they've already separated. So she wouldn't have shown up.
So I think someone asked Paulo Hidalgo about this too, and he clarified he ditched Jyn maybe 4 to 5 years prior, and he's still a few years away from seeing her in Rogue One.
Oh, so this is more like 2 or 3 years or something. Well, I mean, just the idea of like,
but to your point, I mean, once I saw that, this is how Saw Gerrera was portrayed in this episode, I was like, wow, a lot happened to him in those, 2 to 3 years between now and Rogue One.
It's just like,
a lot happened to him.
Did he get back from this mission and just say like, I think I'm going to start drinking this fuel tank stuff that's in my fuel tank, and I'm going to. Right. Yeah, I mean, he's lost, obviously. I mean, I think it would have been interesting if they had tied it in something. He had done something that if we got to see, because I don't think he's coming back on Rebels. That's my feeling. It's like, it's going to be too hard to get an A-list actor to come back and do a voice for a cartoon outside the realm of, him. He's no longer involved with Star Wars. So how are they're never going to explain his injuries. And it would have been a perfect way to say, like, he sacrificed himself, or he was injured, like he got some of that Imperial gas in his lungs and it damaged his lungs, so that's why he's got that weird huffer now, or something happened between him and Rex or Kanan, or even God, I'm blanking on her name, Syndulla, like something happened, Hera Syndulla, and it's like that would explain why he's like, not something so horrible that they'd be enemies, but to the point where it would play to the point where it's like, I'm not going to play by your rules anymore. Either, maybe he kills the Geonosian and ends, but obviously then you wouldn't have the comic book synergy. But, this idea that the only reason that we truly believe that he is a different kind of rebel is the fact that he keeps saying it, the kind of like he wants to kill him, but he never gets to. It's like, I mean, I know it's a kid's cartoon and they don't want to get it too dark, but I guess it would have been a nice time, especially the double episode. And they're going to be covering a lot of other stuff. So like I said, I don't think they're coming back to this guy on the show. That they could have played up the fact that, this is where the divergent opinions about the rebellion happen. Where it's like he becomes more of a, kind of your stereotypical insurrectionist, what do you call it, guy who's by any means necessary kind of philosophical. And then the rebels have this morality kind of thing, which they do touch on it a little bit. But I just wish it was a little bit more explicit. It would have been a great opportunity for a little bit of extra, of his character. And then that way then they could say like, oh, this is why he was doing that. Where it's like, it's one of those mistakes that they do on, oh, sorry, I punched the mic. One of these mistakes they do on Star Wars where they have this kind of, they tend to show they sometimes when they want to insert things, they insert things that like aren't particularly interesting to people. Like a great example would be like, well, okay, well, Rogue One would have Dr. Ezevan or whatever in it. But then you don't understand, like, say in Revenge, and now I'm blaming Disney for things George did, so grain of salt. But, the idea that he never properly explained what the deal was with General Grievous and that cough. It's like, and then, well, of course, find out anecdotally, it's because somebody had a cough at Lucasfilm when they were working on the character and they threw it in as a kind of a riff on that, which, but it's like, well, if it's important enough for you to put in there, it's like, these are the things they show Saw Gerrera, he's got all he's beat to shit, pardon me, and they don't explain why, General Grievous, he's beat to death or whatever, and they don't really explain why, but then they'll throw in a thing like, oh, I bet you're wondering what that doctor in the Walrus Man was doing, a week, 2 days before A New Hope. And it's like, no.
Right.
It's like,
right.
No.
Right. Exactly. Really. I'd care a lot more about how Saw Gerrera ended up the way he did than I do about why the Red 5 call sign was available for Luke.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, and I mean the other question, right? It's like, wow, he had an eventful couple of years between, Saw Gerrera had an eventful couple of years, I guess, not just the injury, but, at this point in Rebels, he was still with the rebellion and doing missions for them. So at what point, does that split occur? And then is that before or after he goes to Jeddah? Like, because in the movie, it seems like he's been on Jeddah for a while and he's pretty entrenched on Jeddah. And maybe part of that is like all the sand everywhere. It, ages things and weathers them. And so it seems like things are older than they are. But, it seems like the impression you get in the movie is that he's been on Jeddah for a while. And I guess maybe 2 years is a long time. But, when does that rift between Saw Gerrera and the rebellion happen? And when does he get to Jeddah? And when does he figure out, that, or when does he say, you know what, my personal mission is to keep the Empire from taking these Kyber crystals off of Jeddah? Like, when does that come to his attention, and how does he get to that point? Like, that's the part I'm more interested in. And that's, I mean, not that they had to use this one episode of Rebels to explain all of that, but the fact that he's more like the Saw Gerrera of 4-year-old Jin Erso than he is to the Saw Gerrera of 22-year-old Jin Erso. It's like, wow, there's a lot of story they have and not a lot of time they have to cram into that. And it's like, yeah, it kind of would have been nice if the performance and the character were written in such a way that it was maybe a shade closer to how we saw him in Rogue One.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I just feel like total missed opportunity, and we can chalk that up to, you know, the timeline, the time frame of when an animated episode is conceived and written and animated, and then they had Rogue One reshoots, so it wasn't something they weren't able to do in a satisfactory kind of thing. I mean, I guess that's my problem with ancillary material. That's why it's like the movies are always, you know, the preeminent concept. I mean, I know there's some people out there that like, oh, I like the book better than the movie or whatever. And it's like, I can never go with that. I mean, it's always going to be like, you know, the movie defines everything, and the books kind of have to try to figure out what to do with that information. And I think of Rebels as being more like a book than being a movie. So it's kind of, but obviously we're not going to get that kind of satisfaction from it. And also like the confusion of the circle within a circle. And it's like, so you're just like, I mean, I guess that's nice in some way, because it's almost like audience participation, where you're like, it's not an egg, it's a Death Star. Come on, come on. And it's just like, well, I understand what they were doing there. It's just, like I said, if I'm always hoping for a little bit more from Rebels, and maybe a little bit more than what I should be, because you know, it's Disney XD and it is supposed to be for kids, because the commercials I'm watching between sections are, you know, Go-Gurt and, you know, throwing sticky things against the wall, and isn't your the guy who's the principal at the grade school looks younger than I am. And I'm just like, oh, maybe maybe I should stop asking for, like, I want to see Saw Gerrera's lungs get destroyed and lose his foot. It's like, well, I mean, if that is what you want to then you really should be reading the Aftermath novels. Well, you know, I don't want that.
There's all kinds of that stuff in the Aftermath.
I don't want people. Well, I don't want eyes getting poked out or whatever. And maybe you're right. Maybe I don't need it that gross. You talked myself out of it.
Right, but I do think, you know, I think our comments speak to the fact that, again, Forrest Whitaker did a really good job making that character really interesting and compelling, and now I want to see more of that character. Right, like when he was just a Clone Wars character, like, it's kind of interesting that's, you know, that you had Jedi going to these planets and starting these, you know, kind of local insurrections, but, you know, that one particular character, I don't know what distinguishes him from other characters, and now it's like, I'm interested in this one particular character now, and so. Again, Forrest Whitaker did a really good job.
Saw Gerrera Comics Limited Series. The guys that did the Lando series should do the Saw Gerrera thing.
Yeah.
And Saw Gerrera, I want a Saw Gerrera, I want like a Black Series 6-inch Saw Gerrera figure that has a button you can push in it, and it'll say things, lies! You know, save the rebellion, save the dream!
Have they sent you to kill me?
I mean, I want, like, that, yeah, and I just realized it's actually going to bug me if there's not going to be a figure that talks. It's like oh man, now I'm kind of like, I got to write Hasbro a letter or something tonight.
So then there is the next episode of Rebels called Warhead. This is an Imperial droid. So the Empire sends out a bunch of droids. You know, it's very much like the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. The music is even very reminiscent of it. So one of these droids lands on the planet where Chopper base is. I can't remember the name of the planet.
I can never remember it.
Yeah, well, they don't really they just refer to it as Chopper Base. So whatever the name of that planet is. It looks very much like the Ralph McQuarrie original, or I don't know original, but one of the Ralph McQuarrie designs for C-3PO. Which means it looks very much like Lando's droid that we've seen on Rebels. But it is attacked by the spider things that are crawling around that planet. And so Chopper and Zeb and the Alan Rickman sounding droid have been left alone on Chopper Base. They find this thing, they reboot it, and when it reboots, it kind of has forgotten what its mission is, at least temporarily. And it helps them catalog all of the stuff that they have at the supply depot, which is very helpful for them. But then Agent Callus, who is Fulcrum, calls the base to warn them that these recon droids were sent out And that's right around the time that the recon droid remembers what it was, and its arms and legs extend, and it gets more evil, more of an evil face, and then it attacks Zeb and the droids. They come up with a plan. Zeb and the droid fight. They shut down the droid, but there's a countdown for the Imperial capture failsafe. You know, that thing that they referred to all the time, these Imperial capture failsafes, which is the proton warhead of the episode title. They freeze the droid so that the countdown stops, but they don't know what to do with it. So they send it back. They put it back in its little escape pod shuttle thing. Send it back to the Star Destroyer. It blows up. It blows up the one Star Destroyer. But in doing so, now Thrawn is able to narrow his search down from like thousands of systems to it's like 93 or 90 something systems where this droid could have come from, and so they made his job a lot easier. This episode is mostly a filler episode because there's a multi-episode Sabine Mandalorian arc coming up, and so this is kind of like, well, before we get to that, let's do this, and let's give Zeb a chance to show leadership, and let's put this combination of, again, very season like 3 of a show. Hey, let's put this combination of characters together that we haven't seen before, Zeb and Chopper and the Alan Rickman droid. So it largely is a filler episode, but at the same time, I was a little surprised that it actually does. It moves the Thrawn and Kallus storylines forward a little bit more than you would expect out of like a standard filler episode of a episodic TV show. You get some hints that Kallus is nervous that Thrawn is closing in on his secret, and at the same time, Thrawn is closing in on our band of rebels here. So you do get some kind of incremental move ahead on the overarching story arcs for the season. And the last thing I'll mention is I mentioned the fact that this new Imperial Recon droid is based on the Ralph McQuarrie design. But then on Rebels Recon, Dave Filoni said that if they had kind of realized where in the production schedule this fell and when it was going to air, that he might have made the droid look a little more like K2SO, because they kind of do similar things, or that he wanted that kind of imposing size and presence, and so he would have based it off of K2SO, the design a little more to do that, which I thought was kind of interesting, and like, yeah, that would have been kind of neat. But I also wonder, like if you have 2 Rogue One tie-ins right in a row, if people would have been like, well, that's all this show is now. Like, it's just tying into Rogue One, and they would have expected a lot of other connections to Rogue One that just weren't going to happen. So what did you think of the Warhead episode, Robert?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a filler episode, but a satisfying filler episode. I had some issues with little story beats and stuff, but yeah, the droid, yeah, it's that kind of McQuarrie thing with kind of mixed with was it Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the which is kind of like the droid that McQuarrie was looking at when he drew C-3PO originally, but yeah, much more kind of almost like a crash test dummy face or whatever.
Yeah, kind of like a cross between how C-3PO ended up and the Metropolis robot.
Yeah,
a little bit.
It's like I said, it's a good story, but it doesn't, until you get to the Thrawn stuff, it doesn't really push it forward. I would say, why is Zeb all of a sudden, I found some droid in the middle of the desert, let's bring it back to base, kind of thing, where it was like, he didn't show a lot of good judgment. If I would have seen a droid just show up or something, I wouldn't necessarily like, let's bring this dead droid back to our base or whatever. It's like, why was it?
Yeah.
Where did it come from? I assume they surveyed the planet before they. That also, the other nit I will pick. So they send that droid back and it blows up a Star Destroyer, and like Kallus seems very pleased, but like, what if it had come back to his ship? He would have been dead. he wouldn't have been smiling out of the other side of his face. That was kind of like, I think I would have been more nervous than anything. The idea that like, oh, you know, he should have at least.
Or what if the ship it blew up, fell to the side and crashed into his ship, right? Like there are many ways that could have gone bad for him.
Yeah, it's that kind of idea where it's like, well, I mean, I like the fact that Callus is, you know, they are playing this idea that he's with Fulcrum and all this. It's kind of interesting. It's like, how many different ways can he like wink to the camera, like, I'm not a bad guy, without it being like Thrawn. It's like picking up on it. I mean, I assume Thrawn kind of already knows now because he's supposed to. I mean, that's the Thrawn I know. He's like super smart.
Or he suspects, at least.
Yeah, he's super smart. He's just waiting for more info. Yeah, like I said, it was just I think it was just kind of a fun episode with the you know, the revelation that they're probably going to have to leave that chopper base, which I hope that the next episode will be them leaving. You know, if Zeb kind of downplayed the breach, so to speak, but I mean, they had one probe droid on Hoth and they were like immediately like, we got to leave. They saw one thing. Yeah. So I hope that they'll be consistent in the idea, like, I mean,
maybe we'll find out that the experience of these rebels on Chopper Base helped inform the decision making on Hoth, right? Like, well, last time this happened at Chopper Base, we didn't move quickly enough, and they showed up. So, you know, that could be a direction they go in as well.
Of course, if we do that, we're going to lose what's his name, the Bendu, because he's on that planet,
right? That's right.
But you know, I honestly, as much as I love Tom Baker, I feel like in some respects that whole thing has been kind of. Well, I mean, come on, if a couple episodes, when Maul showed up, shouldn't they have left? You know what I mean? It's like when Maul. Yeah. It's like
it's not a very secret base these days.
That it does play into that. I was talking about earlier about that in some ways that by the time we've reached Rogue One, the rebellion is almost kind of falling into that same kind of hubris that the Jedi Order has fallen into. Like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't be a worrywart. We'll just, you know, make this deal with Darth Maul. I'm sure he'll never betray us. You know, it's like, okay. But I mean, as far as the actual, I mean, I like the Alan Rickman droid. So any episode with him. But I mean, like I said, the story doesn't have a lot to it to talk about, except for these revelations about narrowing down the planet. So I guess if they left immediately after this problem, then it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't actually kind of create the tension of the fact that he knows he has he's got a 1 in 90 chance of knowing where they're at, and they don't know that. So I mean, I get in some ways that's probably good, because then it'll provide something interesting as the season goes on.
Yeah. I mean, and it seems too, right? They're generating this momentum with this story about the Empire and Thrawn and Callus, and now we're getting a multi-episode Sabine Mandalorian arc. So
yeah,
we'll have to kind of stick a pin on this and come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, I like
several weeks from now.
I like Sabine, but when they start getting into this Mandalorian stuff, I kind of I don't tune out necessarily, but I do kind of. I'm like, I'm not as into it. But then again, maybe this is her. Maybe they've come up with something interesting that they can, you know. At some point, she's going to have to probably leave the crew anyway, because, you know, she's probably going to go back to Mandalore at some point and rule or whatever. I don't know.
I mean, they released a preview clip for the next episode, and it's Kanan training her on how to use the Darksaber, right? So basically like lightsaber training with Sabine, and I thought that's like a good idea, and I enjoyed the clip, but the internal I am not invested in the internal Mandalorian politics, like clan disputes at all. Like they don't really mean a lot to me. Apparently they're an important part of Star Wars now, but I'm just not invested in them at all. Like, it's just all kind of like, yeah, you all work that among yourselves, and I'll be over here with this other stuff. So, yeah, the fact that they're devoting multiple episodes to it, I'm like, all right, well, there are like 4 other balls in the air that you're juggling that you're just going to pretend aren't there for like a month, and then we'll get back to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Rebels feels like, is that they tend to have a lot of these kind of episodes, and then they just kind of rush at the end to try to tie it all in. It's kind of like, well, come on.
Yeah.
It's like, I have to be honest, like, there was a lot of episodes in season 2 where I was just like, I'd like to get back to some more of this stuff, and then they come in with the whole end of the Ahsoka Tano thing, or the Darth Vader, and then they don't resolve it with any, like,
right,
with any certainty. Or wait, no, was that, I'm trying to, like, when did okay, so all the Maul stuff shows up again in the beginning of season 3. See, when they do these half seasons, I get confused because they take these breaks, and then I'm like, wait, is that season 2 or season 3? But
right, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, nothing's earth shattering, and I'm not necessarily looking forward to this Mandalorian stuff as well. I tuned out on the Clone Wars take on this, and never really remembered, except that Obi-Wan there was a Darksaber, Obi-Wan had a girlfriend, and Darth Maul killed her, I think.
Yeah. So do you want to move on to comics, or do you want to save that for next week?
Let's do one comic, and then we can save the rest for next week.
Okay.
How about that?
Do you have a preference for which?
Oh, let's just do Star Wars 26.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about this data stuff, about the sales data, or you're just kind of?
Well, actually, if it's okay with you, why don't we talk about Poe Dameron?
Okay, yeah, let's do Poe Dameron.
See you for afterwards. So,
the much maligned Poe Dameron.
Yeah, well, by us anyway. So, if you'll recall, Poe Dameron and 3PO and the Black Squadron, like engineer or mechanic or whatever, Adi Muva, or Muva, I'm not sure, are on the planet Kadak. They're looking for one of 3PO's droid operatives that he has now.
Because now 3PO's
he's like a spy.
He's Smiley or whatever. Yeah, he's Spy Master Smiley.
So he has this droid operative who has information about the First Order, I guess, or Snoke. He has information about Snoke. So they go to Kadak looking for this droid. So we're going to be talking about issues 9 and 10. So a lot of this will kind of run across both. So they're at a bar. 3PO starts talking loudly about Han Solo for some reason, and how Han Solo owes all this money to the Guavian gang and Conja Club and all this stuff. Guavian gang and Conja Club are there at the bar, and they overhear, and you see them shaking hands. And so that, again, explaining things that happen in the movies, that will lead to the Rathtar scene in The Force Awakens. So after that, and that's basically all that happens. I don't think anything comes of them being in the bar other than that. They find out that the droid that they're looking for is in the custody of the Rank gang. So they go and try to buy the droid from the Rank gang. There's a front desk, apparently, that this gang has at their junkyard or whatever. So the guy at the front desk says, "Hey, aren't you Poe Dameron?" And he goes, "Yes, I am." And then the guy hits him with a stun blaster. But he wakes up and finds out that many of C-3PO's droid operatives have the Rank gang surrounded and protect Poe and all of that. So they find the droid they were looking for, N1ZX or Nunzix, which seems like that's like a very kind of Brian Daley Han Solo trilogy or Lando trilogy kind of.
It is actually
like maybe not for a droid, but like for an alien, they would call him Nunzix. Except Nunzix won't give them the information he has about Snoke until they get off the planet. And what's interesting is, so Nunzix is, I guess, like a protocol droid or something, but his head is shaped a lot like that Geonosian battle droid hybrid from the Vader comic that we referenced earlier. So they're on Kadak. Terex, Agent Terex, is also on Kadak. And we get a lot of backstory on basically why he's on Kadak now, which is that right after the Battle of Jakku, he and this other fellow stormtrooper ended up at Kadak, and they met with some people and started up a business repairing salvaged Imperial ships, right? So there are all of these Imperial ships. There was like a shipyard where there was all these half-finished things and kind of junked Imperial ships because the Empire had fallen. And so they basically, in secret, got a hold of all of these ships and started salvaging them and building them up. And so once the Carrion Spike, Tarkin's ship, the Carrion Spike, was part of that haul. And so they get the Carrion Spike prepared. They get it all fixed up and everything. Terex takes it to be his ship. And because that ship has like a cloaking device and all of these crazy technological advances, he takes over this group and he became, I don't know if you would call it a crime lord or a warlord, but basically he's, the big man on campus here. Somewhere along the lines, then his minions, part of his gang ambushed a ship that was carrying new kinds of armor, new technology for, quote, something called the First Order. So this is the first time he's heard of this First Order. Cut back to present day. One of the people in this gang with him was this guy named Whisper. When Terex had left Kadak and I guess joined the First Order, Whisper kind of took over and he had been running things in Terex's absence. Once Terex comes back, he gets Whisper's men to kill him, and so Terex is back in charge. He gets the Carrion Spike with some just kind of ruffians hanging out. I've said ruffians a few times. Flies over the city on Kadak and puts out like a PA announcement saying anyone who hands over Poe Dameron will get a reward, which leads people to start attacking Poe Dameron. More droid operatives protect them. And it turns out that Terex wanted them to kind of escape because now Poe, thinking they have to get off quickly, he leaves in his X-Wing. They bring the X-Wing out of the cargo hold of the transport ship, and he basically tells all the droids to just hold on to the wings. And so now he has his X-Wing and he's flying around, and turns out Terex has a couple of squadrons worth of fighters that were assembled from various parts of, other Imperial fighters. So you have a TIE fighter cockpit with different wings on it and stuff like that. But Adi Muva, however you pronounce that, disappeared. They can't find him. It turns out he stayed behind, stole aboard the Carrion Spike. He has a blaster drawn. If you will recall, and this was several issues ago, and they haven't really mentioned it since, there is some kind of spy or a leak within Black Squadron who is alerting Terex to where they're going to be. And so that's supposed to be part of Poe's mission, but he basically hasn't talked about it. I've been assuming this whole time that it's Adi because that's how these things work.
Exactly.
Whether he was aware of it or not. But anyway, so he's now on the Carrion Spike. He has a gun. He's gonna get himself in some kind of scrape, I assume. So what did you think of these two issues? What do you think of Poe Dameron and where it's heading?
Oh, I'm never happy about where Poe Dameron is heading, but I like Agent Terex, so I'm always torn. It's it's like I almost kind of wish I could scoop out all the Poe Dameron stuff and just hear the story about 30 years from the Battle of Jakku to Terex at the end, what I mean? At the end of I feel like that's the only interesting part. Like the flashbacks, everything else is just a little too something bad happens. Oh, but something great happens to help out our people. It's Poe Dameron gets stunned, but C-3PO's droid minions, which I just really can't. What was that which issue was it where there was this conversation where basically Poe Dameron tries to instill this idea of you don't need to call me master and all this stuff, and you're just
yeah,
what? I mean, he's a robot. I mean, not that you shouldn't care about robots in the story, but it's the idea. Why are you sure. Just?
He's programmed to do this. Just leave it be.
Exactly, and it's well, I like Terex. He kind of reminds me now he's this guy. He's like that guy on Instagram that I had to look it up while you were talking. It's Gianluca Vacci. Have you seen this guy on Instagram or whatever? He's like this guy. He's got like white hair and he's like ripped and he's got all these tattoos. Basically, he's like he's got 7 million Instagram followers and he does these coordinated dances and stuff. But I think every time I see Terex with his little mohawk and stuff, I'm thinking like, is this this guy in about 10 years or something?
Yes. Well, on that subject. And this is why I wanted to talk about the Poe Dameron comic. I've seen some. I think it's just speculation at this point on Twitter, and I don't even remember who said it. But someone suggested that Benicio del Toro is going to be in episode 8 playing a villain, and someone said, "Well, if you shave his head and you give him a mustache, Benicio del Toro could maybe make a good Terex." Now, this person also said, apparently there were reports on set that, Benicio del Toro was not shaved bald, right? He had hair, but maybe Terex grows some hair. I don't know, but without getting into like whether it's true or not, like, how excited would you be to see, or interested would you be to see Terex in episode 8, and like Benicio del Toro playing Terex, and where that would fit in.
Well, I never even thought of that.
I know. I wanted to surprise you with this to get your.
Well, Terex is the only thing I like about this comic. I'd be okay with it as long as he had a good part. I like Benicio del Toro. He's kind of, to be perfectly honest, he kind of occupies that same space of like the acting, or when people in like Forrest Whitaker, when you're like, well, he doesn't sell tickets, but when you see him listed, you're like, ooh, what's he gonna do? And Benicio is like that. I mean, I keep saying over and over, it's like he's really great in Sicario. It's on Amazon. I think it's on Hulu as well if you people are streamers, and it's definitely, it's not the best movie I've ever seen. It's an interesting movie. But yeah, I'd be all right with that. Yeah, I mean, he could look different. He's, Terex is like, they kind of draw these people sometimes where it's like where they draw them in a way where it's like, well, there's no kind of there's no real ethnicity implied, so it's, and even so, I don't really care, because it's just like that thing where it's like, it's really the character. It's kind of like, but there'd be an awful lot of backstory that they'd have to provide to people, wouldn't they, to make it work? Wouldn't, all of a sudden this guy shows up and they're all like, oh, Agent Terex, and they're like, wait a second. What's that supposed to be?
And maybe, because Phasma, they didn't really give her any backstory, and people still thought she was a great character. Oops, sorry about that. I knocked something over here. I mean, that wasn't a huge part, but, I feel like they could just insert a couple lines of like, oh, we're sending our Imperial or our First Order security agent Terex to do it, and then you see Terex doing stuff, right? You really only need with him a couple lines of dialogue to establish his character, and maybe some of that, it comes out in his character that he used to be a former stormtrooper or whatever, right? And that sets up an interesting maybe relationship between, if you have Terex and Finn, right? Both Terex being a former stormtrooper who then joined the First Order. We don't know why yet, but then Finn being the former First Order trooper and going the other way, and so I think you could set up maybe some interesting interactions between different characters if you put him in episode 8. And I think Benicio del Toro could, have some fun playing a character like Terex, who we've seen as this kind of like flamboyant character, right? He throws these like parties with, half naked people serving drinks, and, he likes living in luxury. He likes, having his own little corner of power. So, I feel like Benicio del Toro could have fun with that and not play it quite as seriously as, some of his other movie roles are. I'm skeptical that that's what this is, but if I would be excited if that's,
well, it doesn't have to be Terex, but there is something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, and now you say it, it makes me think like, even if they don't, that's really would be a really cool like role for Benicio. I mean, and also I hate to say it, I kind of forgot he was in this, and now I'm kind of excited again.
Yeah,
because I'm like, now we're talking like, quirky is such a loaded term, but for lack of it, like I'm starting offbeat. I'm starting to get like after realizing like there wasn't really any great offbeat performances in. Well, I'm gonna walk that back.
BB-8 doesn't count.
I'm gonna say, guess who was the offbeat performance for Force Awakens? Chewbacca.
Yeah.
Because Chewbacca got to do a whole bunch of things that he never got to do in any of the other movies. He was much more I feel like he was much more integral to the story. He was much more of the humor. But anyway, there's this thing where he's, it would behoove them to use his quirkiness. Yes, he was great in, Usual Suspects, where he was playing kind of an odd guy. He was criminally underused in Guardians of the Galaxy as the Collector. I was really expecting him to kind of be the big baddie of the movie, and then he turned out not to be. But yeah, man, I'd be all right with that. I mean, even if that was a type, like, he's about in the right. He'd be, he's just a shy of 50. So it's like, if 30-year jump, he could have been a stormtrooper, a young officer, Imperial who moves on to the First Order, but. Like I said, I haven't heard anything about. They just say he's like an intergalactic bad guy or something.
Right.
Maybe he'll just be a pirate or some goofy thing where he's got 3 lines and they show up to a bar and he's basically Maz Kanata for this movie. And I'm all excited.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking too is I was thinking about the fact that Poe Dameron wasn't supposed to survive The Force Awakens, and then he did. And so now that's a character where they're like, well, initially we didn't plan anything for this guy, and now we have to come up with things for Poe Dameron to do in the other movies. So let's give him his own kind of personal antagonist. And they've started building up this character in the comics. And so then when you see him in the movie, right, that having Terex there gives Poe Dameron something to do. And for the people who have read the comics, it adds this layer of like, oh, they've been going back and forth and they've been playing cat and mouse for years now. And if you haven't read the comics, then it's just like, oh, here's like a new hopefully interesting, bad guy who maybe we haven't seen this kind of character in a Star Wars movie before. And now it's Benicio del Toro having fun with this, so I think given that too, that like, oh, now we need to find things for Poe Dameron to do now that he didn't die off. It would make sense to me to then bring this character, bring Terex into it, but maybe they want to create a new character. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense because I guess it really wouldn't take that much. Somebody, Finn could go like, who is that? Somebody, who is that guy? That's Agent so and so. That's
right.
Poe and him have been going back and forth for a couple years. Poe Dameron's the one who tells everyone who Terex is because he knows. Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing I was thinking of is. So the person on Twitter was saying, oh, well, there were reports on set of Benicio del Toro with Poe Dameron length hair. And so, it still could be Terex. He could change hairstyle.
Hey, man, if you got it,
and
wear it.
I had forgot. Yeah. And at that point, I had forgotten that he was explicitly playing a bad guy because like it's like, we haven't heard about him in a while. So, and so I had this flash of like, oh, maybe he's playing Kes Dameron, Poe's father, who we saw in the Shattered Empire comics. And I think that would be interesting too, to kind of see, again, they need to give Poe Dameron something to do. So maybe he goes back and sees his parents for guidance about something, or he's like, hey, we're fighting this war. Like, what do we do now? Or, they have to bring them in as, long time, friends of Leia's or whatever. And I was thinking, oh, that could be interesting too. But if he's explicitly playing a bad guy, at least he won't be playing Kes Dameron if they do that. But,
right.
I think there are a lot of directions they could take episode 8 and a lot of ways that they could connect it to some of these other stories they've been telling. And that's neat.
Yeah, well, yeah, they say. Well, I'm reading rumors because I'm really like, oh, he wears all black or something like that. He's he's the classic, you know, man in black. But they don't really talk.
Right.
I mean, I think that was that thing where like he kind of took the oh gosh, what's Kylo Ren's real name? Oh,
Ben.
Adam Driver. Adam Driver.
Oh. I thought you meant the character's real character name.
Sorry, I don't know why that tickled me. No, Adam Driver, when they were talking about that whole thing, when they go, well, he wouldn't call himself a villain. And I think Benicio did something similar like that. Like, you playing a bad guy? It's like, I don't think this guy would consider what he's doing to be bad. So it's hopefully, you know, that again, I know it's probably not going to be a Terex guy, but it might be a Terex adjacent type dude. You know, he's just, there's a lot of room for smugglers and thieves and stuff in the Star Wars universe. They can, you know, they kind of undersold them in The Force Awakens. They can probably stand to bring them back a little bit. So like I said, now I'm going to have to do that thing where I have to decide how much I want to read on this so it gets spoiled for me, because I'm sure that the spoilers are going to start leaking out here anytime soon. Who knows, though? Half the spoilers,
exactly.
Rogue One spoilers
fun to think
are
about, but then it's like, oh, maybe it would have been better as a surprise. I don't know.
Well, you know, I was going back to Rogue One again, just as a thing, because about this trailer situation where I was kind of lamenting how different the trailer was. Did you see that thing where basically Gareth Edwards admitted that what they would do at the end of the day, they would just go out and like try to make cool shots, and it was like had no bearing on the story whatsoever. That's where Felicity.
So a lot of that trailer footage,
right? Anything Felicity Jones walking down the hallway with the light and stuff like that was never supposed to be part of anything. It was just like one shot type things that were never intended to be part of the narrative. Which I don't know if I like.
Yeah,
but that's just.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly in keeping with the George Lucas style of like, hey, I just want to have cool looking things in this. But then, I mean, I guess it just seems like wasteful of like people's time and energy to just like, oh, let's just make some cool shots that won't end up in the film at all.
Yeah.
And I know you have to make cuts everywhere, but it's just like, I mean, be a little more cognizant of like, hey, we need to put a story together rather than just like cobble together whatever film you have and then go, oh, we need another 30 minutes of stuff to explain who all these people are and why we care they die. You know, which is kind of what it seems like they did.
Exactly. Well, maybe we should wrap up.
I think that's a good place to
I will say, so we're so deep into the episode, I feel like it's safe to, like, people are listening, they probably at least are not so infuriated with our opinions that they've shut us off. So I'm going to say one thing, because I don't like to be negative, but I'm going to say one kind of negative. Did you watch Saturday Night Live this week?
Nope, I have not watched Saturday Night Live in years.
Yeah, so Felicity Jones was the host.
Yeah,
she was not.
Yeah,
she was not. It was not. It did not go well, in my opinion. In my estimation, she was like. She seemed extremely nervous from the get-go, and I don't think that nervousness ever went away. It was like she was reading off cue cards, and I mean, comedy is not easy. This is not a ding on her. It's just as an actress or whatever. I mean, she was definitely not even in the top 100, worst, like Steven Seagal or Andrew Dice Clay or some of the sports people they've had on, but I would say that, and also a lot of it probably had to do with the writing. It wasn't strong, and as a Star Wars fan, at some point I would have called myself a pretty big SNL fan, but I'm not any. I wouldn't say I was anymore. But one of the things you could almost guarantee is that somebody on staff was going to come up with a kick-ass Star Wars themed skit. And there really wasn't. It was Keenan dressed as Saw Gerrera, and he didn't even do the voice. And it was like, and there was a hologram and with Tina Fey, and I honestly, to be perfectly honest, I don't even remember what they talked about.
Yeah.
It was so like, oh. Yeah, anyway, I mean, not to pick on Felicity. Did I say Daisy Ridley? I meant Felicity Jones. But
yeah, no, I think you said Felicity Jones.
Felicity Jones.
I'm the one who keeps messing those up.
It's just not. It was not. I felt bad for her because it just obviously she doesn't seem to have and it's live, for criminy sake. It's like I can't imagine what the pressure of that would be like. But unfortunately, it was not one of the funnier.
Yeah,
SNL
I mean, I wonder
sketch.
too, right? Like, how much time was she actually there rehearsing, right? Because the days of the host showing up and like pitching sketch ideas, and in some host case, even like helping to write sketches, like those days are long.
Oh yeah,
gone.
I don't even think
so. Like, who even knows like how when she showed up in New York, and hey, I'm here on Monday. These all sound great. I have to go do a bunch of other press things now, and then she shows back up on Thursday like, all right, so let's start rehearsing. It which is not, and that, again, that's not a knock on her, that's just kind of right, that's how it goes these days. But yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, so if you guys are on the fence about that, I would, if you want my recommendation, you can go ahead and skip it. If you saw it and you thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, and you think we're wrong, you know how you can get a hold of us.
How's that?
Hosts, HOSTS at talkingbirdcast.com. That is our email address. We are on Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have a website at www.talkingbirdcast.com. Yeah. We also have one of these great Amazon affiliate links, and we love it when you use it because it helps pay some bills around here. And that is www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. I think that's pretty much all we have for the week. Did you have anything you needed to add before we wrap up this?
No.
All right. This has been Talking Birdcast, or Talking Bird, the special edition. I don't even know the name of this thing anymore. It's been episode 70.
Talking Bird, the special
That's right.
edition.
Talking Bird, the global initiative. Thanks for listening, and may the force be with you.